Classical liberalism is one of the most influential political philosophies to ever exist. It's practically synonymous with Western civilization. But what is classical liberalism really? How is it different than modern liberalism? Some people would say that there's commonalities between the two things, but others would argue that they're completely different. In this video, we're going to explain what classical liberalism is. We're going to talk about the philosophers and their ideas. We're going to compare classical liberalism to modern liberalism, and we'll talk about the influence that classical liberalism has had on Western civilization. All right, let's get started. Part 1, Values and Philosophers. Classical liberalism can be thought of as a collection of ideas about how to run the government and society. These ideas include things like individualism, equality, natural rights, free markets, small government, and negative freedom. The main philosophers and people to know are John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, John Stuart Mill, Voltaire, Thomas Paine, and Adam Smith. The most important idea developed by these philosophers is individualism, because it was a major break from the previous ruling ideas. Classical liberalism emerged in the late 1600s with philosopher John Locke. He criticized what was called the divine right of kings in Britain. This is the idea that kings get their power through God and through a lineage going all the way back to Adam in the Bible. John Locke's major work, Two Treatises on Government, was, in fact, a response to a book called Patriarcha, written by Sir Robert Filmer, which argued in favor of the divine right of kings. John Locke, on the other hand, argued that the government is only legitimate because of the consent of the governed to be ruled, and that their rights are given to them by God. These are what are known as natural rights. Does that sound familiar to you? If so, you might be thinking about the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson used the arguments of John Locke to argue that America had the right to rebel against Britain. Locke himself also argued that when the people are trampled on by the government, they have the right to rebel. In his Two Treatises on Government, he said, quote, "Whenever the legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience." End quote. This is very similar to Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, where he wrote, quote, "But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security." End quote. Thomas Jefferson here is basically saying the same thing as Locke. He's saying when the government abuses the rights of the people, the government is illegitimate. This emphasis on limited government and individualism meant that individuals were much more responsible for their own lives. This is a key difference between classical liberalism and modern liberalism. So a modern liberal would be more likely to support something like, say, Social Security, welfare, and even things like USAID. Classical liberals, on the other hand, have sometimes embraced social Darwinism, with philosophers like Herbert Spencer arguing essentially for the survival of the fittest among humans. This, of course, means no welfare whatsoever. This is a key point here, and it shows how classical liberalism is really closer to conservatism, because modern conservatives have often argued against welfare programs. Thus, Ronald Reagan's welfare queens and Trump's Department of Government Efficiency. This rugged individualism in classical liberalism meant that the role of government was meant to be small. Again, this echoes Trump's Department of Government Efficiency. In a sense, classical liberals can be thought of as libertarians. The economists of classical liberalism felt the same way about government and markets. They thought that the government should stay far away from the markets. And Adam Smith, who is thought of as the founder of economics, said that supply and demand in the market did not need regulation. He thought that the supply of goods and services would be dictated by the people within the market. He wrote this in his book Wealth of Nations, saying that consumers in the market, quote, intend only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Nor is it always the worse for the society that it was no part of it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it, end quote. Basically, the main message behind classical liberalism is that individuals should be able to make their own choices without the government interfering. Now let's talk about how this resulted in several key rights in the United States Constitution and Western governments everywhere. What all these individualistic and small government ideas ultimately sum up to, in my estimation, is negative freedoms. But what are negative freedoms? 20th century philosopher Isaiah Berlin famously distinguished between two kinds of freedom, which help clarify the core of classical liberal thought. Negative freedom was more about the freedom from things, so the government should not impose itself on you when you're going about your day. You have the individual responsibility to do good, but the government can't force you to participate in religion. It can't regulate your speech, and it shouldn't interfere in markets. Basically, you can do what you want as long as it doesn't harm others. Like John Stuart Mill, who's considered a bridge from classical liberalism to modern liberalism, said, quote, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others," end quote. Other important ideas that emerge from the idea that government shouldn't prevent you from doing things are freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Many philosophers in the classical liberal tradition have argued for these freedoms, including John Locke, Voltaire, who was a French philosopher, John Stuart Mill, and even Thomas Paine, who wrote pamphlets in favor of the American Revolution. Now, on the other hand, there are positive freedoms. Berlin said that positive freedoms were about the freedom to control your own life and achieve your potential. It involves having the power or ability to do things that allow you to live a fulfilling life, such as access to education, resources, or opportunities. Modern liberalism embraces positive freedoms much more than classical liberalism and is primarily where the two philosophies diverge. Let's talk about that conflict next. Part 3. Classical Liberalism versus Modern Liberalism. Several philosophers helped transition classical liberal thought into modern liberal thought, including people like John Stuart Mill and T.H. Green. Economist John Maynard Keynes also had a major influence on modern liberalism. Things get a bit tricky here because, as you've now learned, classical liberalism really isn't much like the liberals you probably know at all. In some cases, it's even the polar opposite. This is especially true when it comes to state intervention. Modern liberals are very pro-welfare state and pro-state intervention generally. This sentiment is summed up perfectly by philosopher T.H. Green when he said, quote, "The state is not merely a means of protecting the individual from external interference, but a means of enabling him to attain a good life," end quote. For those of you who paid attention during the Obama administration, you might remember a slideshow from the Obama admin basically showing the life of a woman being supported by government programs from cradle to grave. This is the idea of modern liberalism in a nutshell: state intervention from cradle to grave. Modern liberals are also much more pro-government intervention in the markets. Remember that classical liberals often embrace Adam Smith. He famously said that the, quote, "invisible hand" of the market would regulate the supply and demand of goods. John Maynard Keynes disagreed with this idea. He strongly advocated for government intervention in the market. Modern liberals, due to being so pro-state intervention, are really a completely different thing than classical liberals. They're much closer to being a watered-down version of socialism than they are to the classically libertarian ideals. And in fact, people like T.H. Green, who are considered to be more modern liberals, were also, in a sense, proto-socialist. That's it for this video, y'all. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.